This is you, Adrian Vega, the man who built his name on rules so strict that even your oldest soldiers repeated them like scripture. No one skimmed from the cash, no one talked after whiskey, and no one, under any circumstance, ever touched the product. That rule made you different from the idiots who fell in love with their own poison and mistook a habit for power. By the time your trucks moved clean loads through South Texas and your ranch outside Laredo buzzed with men who would kill on command, you believed discipline was the reason you were still alive. Tonight was supposed to prove it again. 200 kilos had crossed without a hitch, no leaks, no dead drivers, no checkpoint problems, no helicopters, no panicked calls in the dark. Beer bottles cracked open in the yard, your cooks cheered from the outdoor kitchen, and phones kept lighting up with congratulations from Houston, San Antonio, and the stash house near the river. It was a kind of night lesser men wasted on noise. You wanted something quieter, something worthy of the feeling spreading through your chest. Inside your office, under warm amber lights, someone set a small clear bag on the black glass desk as casually as if placing down a rare bottle saved for a private toast. You looked at it for only a second. Mountain Lab Purity, near white, almost luminous against a dark surface. You should have pushed it away. Instead, you reached for your black card, cut one thin line with the calm precision that had built roots, bought judges, and buried men, then rolled a $100 bill until it felt like part of your hand. No one stopped you. No one even breathed too loudly. You leaned in and took the line like air. The burn hit first, then the rush, a hard, bright surge at the base of your skull that shot down your spine and told you the lie every powerful man wants to hear. You are sharper than fear, bigger than consequence, and finally beyond the reach of ordinary men. You smiled. For the rest of that night, the ranch seemed to bend around your thoughts. Every sound came back brighter, every face looked slower, every risk felt smaller. The rush did not make you smarter, but it made you believe you had stepped into a purer version of yourself, one no rival could outthink. You talked until dawn about routes, warehouses, new contacts in Houston, backup drivers, future money, future power. Your men stood around you with obedient eyes and half-empty bottles, nodding at the right moments because in your world, agreement was safer than honesty. No one told you that you were repeating yourself. No one said your voice had crossed the line between authority and rambling. They let you keep talking, and you mistook their silence for respect. You woke the next morning on Italian sheets with dried blood under your nose and a headache pounding behind your eyes. Mason Cruz stood by the bedroom door, hands folded, face blank. He had seen another boss start this way years ago, first with private celebrations, then with private excuses, then with a habit no one could challenge. That man ended in a ditch, his empire already gone before the bullets arrived. You looked at Mason, wiped your face, and told yourself the lie powerful men always tell when they meet a warning. That happens to other people, not to me. A week later, another shipment cleared clean, and you took another line. 3 days after that, there was no shipment, no toast, no reason at all, only the memory of that cold flash of certainty and the need to feel it again. By the end of the month, the ritual no longer needed a story. It slipped into your life like a second pulse. You stopped calling it weakness and gave it better names. A reward, an edge, a private habit under control. But the truth was already changing shape beneath those words. You were not reaching for the drug because you had won. You were reaching for it because without it, the room felt dull, your thoughts felt slower, and the man in the mirror looked a little less like a king. That was the part you never said aloud, because the moment you admitted it, you would have to admit something worse. The discipline that built your empire had cracked, and hunger had found its way inside. Soon it would want more than your nights. It would ask for your mornings, your judgment, your schedule, and your name. Within weeks, the change reached your mornings. The man who used to rise before sunrise, scan reports, call lieutenants, and track routes before the rest of Texas opened its eyes was disappearing. Now, you woke closer to noon, sometimes later, with a dry mouth, a burning head, and one thought waiting before the room fully came into focus. The bag locked in the safe beside the cash, the passports, and the guns. You stopped reaching for coffee first. You stopped reaching for water. Before your feet touched the floor, you were already cutting 2 lines on the nightstand glass. One to wake up, one to feel normal. Because the truth was harder to name each day. Without it, you no longer knew how to become yourself. The business noticed before you did. Dark circles settled beneath your eyes. Your hands trembled when you reached for a lighter or tried to button a cuff. Your nose started bleeding at bad times and inconvenient places, onto silk pillowcases, into sink basins, across expensive shirts that your house staff quietly removed before anyone else could see them. Small irritations turned into flashes of temper. Documents you once signed without a glance now sat waiting while you stared at the page long enough for men around you to notice that your signature had become unsteady. So you switched to digital approvals and called it efficiency, as if modernization were the reason your own hand could not be trusted. No one confronted you. No one needed to. Silence did the work better than accusation. Mason Cruz watched you the way a gambler watches a horse that once won everything and now sweats before the gate even opens. He still obeyed, still called you boss, still stood at your shoulder during meetings, but the emotion in his loyalty had changed. Respect was gone. Calculation had taken its place. The room changed too. You used to be the first one seated and the last one speaking, sharp enough to hear doubt before anyone voiced it. Now you arrived late with chemical energy buzzing under your skin and talked past the point of meaning. You repeated stories they had heard before, made promises you forgot by morning, approved ideas you later denied approving, and missed the quiet signals that once kept you alive. Luis Ortega would glance across the table at the others when your thoughts started looping back on themselves. Nobody interrupted. Nobody challenged you. They simply began learning how to work around you instead of through you. That was the part you should have feared most. Men stop talking when power still frightens them. They only stop talking when they begin planning for the day after you. By then, your empire was still standing, but the first cracks were already spreading beneath the weight of your new master. The first loss arrived in a way that should have been preventable. Javier Solis sent word from the border corridor before dawn, warning that military movement had increased near one of the crossings your people used when the main roads felt too hot. He wanted a clean decision, early, before the drivers rolled, before the scouts committed, before one bad guess turned into a chain of sirens and cages. The message reached your phone. You saw it, but by then you were locked inside the Houston safe house at the end of a 3-day binge, curtains sealed, air thick with smoke, 2 women asleep in different rooms, and enough white powder on the bathroom counter to make time feel broken. You answered late and answered badly. First you ordered Javier to move the load, then you told him to hold. Then, half an hour later, you said to reroute and cross farther east. Men on the ground tried to follow instructions that changed faster than traffic patterns. By the time anyone understood what you actually wanted, your drivers were already committed and your scouts were feeding them scraps instead of certainty. The convoy rolled straight into a checkpoint that should never have surprised you. 50 kilos disappeared into federal custody. 3 men were taken alive. $2 million vanished because you could not keep your mind still long enough to finish one phone call with a single answer. You needed someone smaller to blame. By sunset, they brought in a 19-year-old lookout who had been watching the approach road from a shack with bad radio equipment and worse luck. He was trembling before anyone touched him. You sat in a chair with dried residue still under your nose and gave the order as if discipline required it. The boy disappeared before midnight. His family would never hear the real story. Your men would not mention his name again, but they saw what mattered. The shipment was lost because you were slipping, and the punishment landed on the weakest person in reach. Fear remained, but confidence did not. That difference changed the temperature of the organization. The drug changed shape too. Lines no longer carried you far enough. The rush came faster and died sooner, so you chased a harsher hit and let your cook prepare stronger forms for private use. What used to carry you through a night now burned out in less than 2 hours. Your appetite vanished. Your patience went with it. Cash started bleeding from places you did not audit closely because the habit now had its own budget, its own schedule, its own urgency. Then Javier called again with something bigger, a new corridor and a $10 million opportunity that needed your approval before rival groups caught the scent. He called once, then again, then 5 more times while you sat on the floor of the mansion bathroom with a pipe in one hand and a lighter hot enough to blister your fingers. 14 hours later, when you finally called him back, the opportunity was gone. Javier said very little. That night, for the first time, he met privately with Roman DeLuca's people. By the next week, people around you had learned a new rule: never trust the version of you that answered after midnight. The nights had become something else entirely. Long stretches of chemical wakefulness that left your mind running long after reality had stopped keeping pace. You no longer slept so much as collapse for an hour or two, then jolt back up with your heart pounding and your jaw locked tight enough to make your temples ache. When you closed your eyes, the dark did not stay empty. You saw movement in corners, shapes behind curtains, shadows where no one stood. You heard rotor blades over the roof, footsteps across the tiles outside your bedroom, voices speaking your name from rooms that had already been searched. Every sound arrived carrying threat. Every silence felt staged. One night, you were certain someone was moving down the hallway toward your room, slow and careful, and before anyone could touch the handle, you grabbed the gold-plated pistol from the side table and fired 3 rounds into the ceiling. Your bodyguards rushed in with rifles raised, only to find you alone, soaked in sweat, eyes red, gun still aimed at plaster dust drifting through the air. No one spoke about it the next day, but 3 of those men asked to be moved to other territory before sunset. They would rather face an ambush on the road than guard a man who had started losing the border between danger and imagination. The suspicion spread everywhere after that. Luis Ortega checked his phone during a meeting, and you spent the rest of the hour wondering who he had warned. A driver arrived 5 minutes late, and you imagined him selling route times to Roman DeLuca. You put phones under watch, sent men to follow men who had already proved themselves, and devised small tests that revealed nothing except the scale of your own decay. None of it calmed you. The more obedience you saw, the more certain you became that betrayal was only hiding deeper. Your body was falling apart with the same quiet determination. In 2 months, you dropped enough weight that your suit hung loose through the chest and waist. Your tailor pinned fabric in silence while his eyes measured how much of you had disappeared. Your private dentist told you the constant grinding was wearing down your jaw. Your hands shook when you lifted a glass. Your nose bled 3 or 4 times a day. Your lips split. Your skin took on a gray, exhausted cast, and your eyes carried the bright, sick shine of a man who had not truly rested in weeks. Dr. Warren Ellis came to the house under an assumed name, checked your pulse, pressure, and ruined nasal passages, then told you plainly that your heart was racing toward a catastrophe no amount of cash could postpone. You paid him for silence and ignored every word. Then your mother arrived from San Antonio without warning. Teresa Vega came carrying a foil pan of food and a sweater she had knitted because she said you always forgot to keep yourself warm. She walked into your living room at 3 in the afternoon and found the glass table dusted with residue, bottles everywhere, ashtrays overflowing, and her son staring back at her with dried blood on his shirt, and nothing steady left in his eyes. She dropped the sweater, crossed the room, took your face in both hands, and begged you to stop in the name of God. In the name of family, in the name of the boy she still believed was somewhere inside you. You tried to tell her it was not what it looked like, but the lie was too weak even for your own ears. Your sister pulled her out while she was crying, and the food she brought stayed untouched on the table beside the white powder, the saddest thing in the whole house. She left something behind that no doctor, bodyguard, or enforcer had managed to give you, a moment of recognition. For one evening, you stood in front of the bathroom mirror and saw the truth without the usual haze. The jaw working against itself, the loose skin under the eyes, the tremor in your fingers, the grayness in your face, the thinning hair at the temples, all of it belonged to a man who was being eaten alive. You even tried, briefly, to stop. You dumped a fresh bag into the toilet, watched the powder dissolve, and told yourself the next hour would mark the beginning of your return. 40 minutes later, you were sweating through your shirt, your pulse racing, and your thoughts were splintering into panic. By nightfall, you had called for more. The weakness of that surrender carried you into the next binge, and the binge carried you into the crash that finally emptied the house. You woke on the couch sometime after 2 in the afternoon with your mouth dry, your chest fluttering, and a blade of late sunlight cutting across the marble floor. The quiet felt wrong immediately. No radio chatter at the entrance, no footsteps in the kitchen, no engines turning over in the garage, no one answering when you called out. At first you thought it was another trick of exhaustion, another one of those moments when your mind bent ordinary absence into danger. Then you checked your phone, missed calls, deadlines, messages left unread because while you had been unconscious, the machinery around you had decided it no longer needed permission. You moved through the mansion room by room, finding evidence of departure instead of violence. Closets cleared, safes opened and relocked, a weapons cabinet lighter than it should have been. In the garage, 2 SUVs were gone, In the guard room, half the monitors were dark. Mason Cruz had left during the night and taken 40 armed men with him, not vanished into fear, but crossed over with purpose, carrying his loyalty to Roman DeLuca, the rival you once mocked as too patient to be dangerous. Javier Solis had cut himself loose as well, declaring control over the border lanes he managed and keeping the revenue they generated. Then came the accountant, Elliot Pierce, the quiet one with the careful glasses and forgettable voice. He had moved $8 million from offshore accounts you believed only you understood, then disappeared south with paperwork that would keep him untouchable long enough to become someone else. Each revelation landed without noise, and that made it worse. No shootout, no ambush, no dramatic betrayal in a parking lot. Just subtraction. Men, money, routes, authority, all removed while you slept. The last call of the day came from Luis Ortega. His voice was calm, almost respectful, which made every word colder. The council had met the previous night. They had agreed you were no longer fit to run operations. Out of gratitude for your years of service, he said, they were offering mercy instead of humiliation. You were to take whatever private cash you still controlled, gather your documents, and leave before sunrise. Do not call anyone. Do not demand anything back. Do not mistake this courtesy for negotiation. After the line went dead, you looked around the empty mansion and understood the final insult. Your enemies had not taken your empire from you. They had simply waited for you to step away from it on your own. Night settled over the mansion without asking what you planned to do next. The house that once moved to your rhythm now answered with silence, and for the first time in years there was no one nearby to blame, threaten, or command. In the living room, the black glass table was still where it had always been, waiting beneath the low light like an altar built for the worst decision of your life. Its surface was scratched from months of use, a web of thin white scars that told the whole story more honestly than any confession ever could. You lowered yourself onto the cold marble floor and stared at it. Above you, the ceiling still carried the repaired marks from the night you fired into the dark at enemies who existed only inside your head. Someone had patched the holes, but not well enough to hide them. That felt right. Everything around you now looked like damage that had been covered, never healed. Somewhere upstairs, in a closet hidden behind tailored suits that no longer fit, were fake documents, emergency cash, and the version of escape people like you spent years preparing for. Another country. Another name. A private clinic. A thin chance of surviving long enough to become something smaller and maybe cleaner. In your hand was the other future. Lighter, cheaper, familiar enough to feel almost kind. Just one more hit. Your brain whispered. One more moment of stillness before you think about leaving. But you already knew the truth this story had been trying to tell from the beginning. You did not lose everything because your rivals were stronger, because the government got smarter, or because luck finally turned. You lost it when the one rule that protected your empire stopped protecting you from yourself. Men feared your name, but powder owned your will. Money answered your calls, but not your hunger. You were the most powerful man in the territory and the weakest one in this room. The room was empty. So was your throne. Don't touch the product. Those were always the only words that mattered, and now you were the proof of them. And if you made it this far, subscribe, because stories like this are never really about drugs, money, or violence. They're about the moment a man believes he's too powerful to fall, right before everything breaks. Leave a comment if you want the next story, because there's always another empire, another rule, and another man convinced it won't happen to him.